Hello and thank you for joining us on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of today's top stories. The nation's highest court today took up a Texas-led immigration case that challenges the White House's border policy. We have details on how those Supreme Court arguments unfolded. Now that Twitter is swapping hands, we take a look at the platform's impact on politics, both past and future. Did Twitter play a role in the 2020 election, and what role might it play in 2022? Secretary of State Antony Blinken today testified on the U.S.'s foreign relations priorities. What did he have to say about Russia and China after his weekend trip to Kyiv? President Biden today announced 3 pardons and commuted dozens of sentences as part of a White House initiative launching job training and reentry programs for prisoners. A report by a media analysis watchdog says big tech platforms are censoring criticism of President Joe Biden. The Media Research Center in Virginia says criticisms of Biden were censored more than 640 times over the past 2 years. About a fourth of the censored content involved the New York Post reports about the president's son, Hunter Biden, and his alleged corrupt business dealings. Twitter blocked the circulation of the story, and other news outlets casted doubt on the truthfulness of the developments. The Media Research Center says pro-Biden censorship started during his presidential campaign and continues up until today. Since the suppression of this story, many outlets, including the New York Times and Washington Post, have since acknowledged the story's legitimacy. The effects social media can have on politics are powerful, profound, and long-lasting. This is apparent from the 2020 election, as former President Trump is still banned from Facebook and Twitter. Messages can be suppressed or allowed to go viral at the command of an algorithm. Our next guest is former Deputy White House Press Secretary and 2020 Trump campaign Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. Hogan Gidley, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
Hogan, for those who might not be locked into the Musk purchase of Twitter, I'm sure we have quite a few viewers who are not all that active on social media. What do you make of it, and how big of a deal is it?
Look, I think it's a huge deal, and it can't be overstated. Twitter's influence on news that we see, information that we hear about, because Twitter is basically controlled, of course, by the left, but for the most part, those who are most active. I saw a statistic in which it stated 80% of the activity on Twitter is done by 10% of the users, and that 10% is made up of members of the media, folks from Hollywood, and of course elected officials. That's important because most of those institutions are controlled by the left. And so when that information gets out there on the platform, what you're seeing is in unison, lockstep ideology of one side of an issue. And so other news outlets around the world, around this country for sure, get that information and drive that narrative unfettered, unchallenged by anybody else, because it is said all together in one voice on the Twitter platform. That's problematic for a myriad of reasons, but when Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter, what he has now done is opened up that town square, as he called it, to more voices.
We have the midterm elections approaching. You are part of the Trump administration as well as the Trump campaign. How important was social media, say, especially Twitter, from the perspective of elections?
Extremely important. Again, can't be overstated. Look, go back and look at the Hunter Biden laptop, for example. Mostly, I would say censorship or bias kind of rears its head in two ways. What you cover and how you cover it. So you go back and look at the Hunter Biden laptop situation. We couldn't tweet about it at the campaign. We couldn't talk about it in our direct messaging. We sure couldn't do ads on it. Even though we had ads, they wouldn't run the ads because they collectively said it was Russian disinformation. Now, let's be clear. When I worked in the White House for 4 years under Donald Trump, consistently, the media would come out using shadowy sources or unnamed sources inside the Pentagon, inside the DOJ, inside the FBI and the CIA. You're telling me the media couldn't make one simple phone call to find out if the Hunter Biden laptop was real or not? Of course they could. They didn't do it because they didn't want to know, or they didn't want to have to report the fact. that Hunter Biden had business dealings all over the world and had been profiting off of his father's name for quite some time. Now, in and of itself, you would say that may not be a big deal, but look at the global foes we face right now. We're dealing with China, we're dealing with Russia, we're dealing with Ukraine, all of whom gave Hunter Biden millions and millions of dollars in payments. Where did that money go? Who did it go to? Emails on that laptop, verified at the time, mind you, 17 months ago, proved that 10% went back to the big guy. They even used the code name the Secret Service used for him, Celtic, to talk about Joe Biden getting some of this money. Now we found out that so much of Hunter Biden's business dealings and the people he worked with actually made 19 visits to the White House. I don't know how many people in your listening, viewing audience have been to the White House once, much less 19 times. So I'm not exactly sure what they were talking about. But either way, these are serious questions the American people should know about.
President Trump was working on his own social media platform in response to this censorship. What do you think this liberating of Twitter means for Trump's Truth Social?
Well, it looks like right now Trump has said he's not going to get back onto Twitter. I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago at Mar-a-Lago. We had a great conversation. I'll keep most of that, of course, private on this interview. But look, I think he's moving forward with new avenues, new ways to communicate directly with the American people. That's what Donald Trump did on Facebook and on Twitter that infuriated the left so much. He didn't need the filter of the mainstream media. He didn't need an anchor to tell you as an American what he was thinking. He just told you himself with the touch of a button on a social media platform. So now that he's opened his own Truth Social, and it is moving aggressively across this country to really get up its usage. Also, people are signing up like crazy, outpacing metrics of Twitter, of course. So I think it's a really good avenue for him to take. And one more thing I'll say about it is, turns out all the things Donald Trump was talking about ended up being true. So all the things he was saying, they weren't conspiracy theories, they were spoiler alerts.
Hogan Gidley, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
The Supreme Court today took up a case that calls into question a Trump-era immigration policy. The policy is often referred to as the Remain in Mexico policy because it forces illegal immigrants to stay in Mexico as they wait for their asylum cases to be processed. Texas sued the Biden administration, and lower courts have ruled conservatively thus far, effectively preventing Biden from getting rid of this Trump-era rule. But now the White House has asked the Supreme Court to weigh in. Melina, what can you tell us about this?
The Supreme Court did hear those oral arguments this morning. It lasted about 2 hours. Justices have heard from both Texas and the Biden administration. Now, one of the main arguments from the Biden administration is that the Remain in Mexico policy takes a significant amount of money to implement, and they're nudging the court to allow them to end that Remain in Mexico policy and use that money in other ways. For example, hiring more Border Patrol agents, hiring more patrol officers who can then monitor those illegal immigrants after they're released into the U.S. and force them to attend those immigration court hearings. But how is Texas responding to this? Here's what the Attorney General told me.
So part of my response is it would be less expensive if they'd actually enforce the law and not create an open border policy that incentivizes more people to come here. So, yeah, I understand that Congress maybe has not given them enough resources to detain all the people that have been invited. But if you would stop inviting people, the resource constraint wouldn't be the same problem as it is now. They've created this sort of loophole where they say, well, we don't have enough resources because too many people are coming. And now we have to let them go into the country. Well, you invited them to come. Of course they're coming. So you've created the very problem that you are blaming Congress for.
The attorney representing President Biden told the justices that instead of forcing migrants to wait in Mexico while they claim asylum, the administration prefers to treat each person case by case. The justices pressed her on how the administration plans to handle the overwhelming influx of illegal immigrants at the border.
You're saying 220,000 in a month, and about 30,000 or so, 38,000 are detained, and the rest are paroled?
Well, there are a variety of tools that DHS uses. They're not all paroled. Many of them were expelled pursuant to Title 42.
I see.
This comment comes as the Biden administration is pushing to end Title 42. And how many illegal immigrants are released into the U.S.?
In March 2021, I believe the parole figure was about 37,000, and then there were another 43,000 that received bond or conditional parole under Section 1226A.
The attorney for Texas argued that the Biden administration is systematically violating the law by releasing immigrants who are legally required to be sent back.
The United States flatly admits that it is releasing on their own recognizance something on the order of 31,000 aliens who would be subject to 1225D. That's precisely the kind of systemic violation of law that even if MPP would not altogether alleviate, and it certainly wouldn't, would at least reduce.
The Biden administration argues that the lower courts have no standing to force the administration to keep the Remain in Mexico policy, since this policy requires that the U.S. works with Mexico to implement it. And President Biden will meet with Mexico's president this week to discuss the immigration crisis.
Now, it's unclear how the Supreme Court will rule in this particular case, but it's important to note that justices did resist the Biden administration's previous attempts to end this Remain in Mexico policy back in August. An official ruling is expected by this summer. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
President Biden is invoking his powers of presidential clemency for the first time. He's granting 3 pardons and commuting the sentences of 75 others. The White House made the announcements today, along with his job training and reentry initiatives for those in prison or recently released. Individuals receiving clemency from Biden include an 86-year-old former Secret Service agent who was convicted for bribery decades ago. They also include people who committed crimes but went on to reform and become role models. Sentences were commuted for several people who committed crimes before the 2018 bipartisan sentencing reform, which was signed into law by former President Trump. They were serving sentences that were lengthier than if they had committed the same crime after the sentencing reform. Trump had granted over 140 pardons and almost 240 clemencies during his 4 years in office. Secretary of State Antony Blinken testified today after coming back from Ukraine. What's next in our response to Russia and Ukraine, and what's he foreshadowing about Biden's strategy toward China? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
People eating outside, sitting on benches. It was right in front of us. The Ukrainians have won the battle for Kyiv.
Making his first public appearance after his weekend trip to Kyiv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Would President Biden be open to accepting Ukraine as an unaligned, neutral nation?
We, Senator, are not going to be more Ukrainian than the Ukrainians. These are decisions for them to make.
That said, Blinken is calling on Congress to approve more aid for Ukraine. He said is to ensure both
Russia's war in Ukraine is a strategic failure for the Kremlin and serves as a powerful lesson to those who might consider following its path.
While Blinken did not name who those tempted countries might be, some senators are making it clear.
This all relates in a very real way with U.S. response to China's ambitions, the most important challenge facing the United States today. We started too late in providing security assistance to Ukraine. We cannot make the same mistake with Taiwan.
The Secretary of State also noted that European countries are developing a, quote, deep skepticism over China's response to the war.
China is paying a reputational cost to be charitable about it, sitting on the fence, never mind falling on the Russian side.
In addition, Blinken said he will publicly address a national security strategy specifically toward China in the coming weeks. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Attorney General Merrick Garland today said that no interference will be allowed into the Department of Justice's investigation into President Biden's son, Hunter.
There will not be interference of any political or improper kind.
And the president's already told his subordinates, clearly, that these are people that he can fire at will, that he and his family did nothing wrong. How can the American people be confident that his administration is conducting a serious investigation?
Because we put the investigation in the hands of a Trump appointee from the previous administration, who's the United States Attorney for the District of Delaware, and because you have me as the Attorney General, who is committed to the independence of the Justice Department from any influence from the White House in criminal matters.
In a hearing before the Senate Appropriations Committee today, Garland declined to say whether the department has or is considering appointing a special counsel, though he noted that special counsels are also employees of the Justice Department. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy led a GOP delegation to the southern border this week. In a press conference on the banks of the Rio Grande, he appealed to keep Title 42 and criticized Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas over the uncontrolled influx of illegal immigration. And as we just told you, a federal judge has stepped in to temporarily allow Title 42 to stay in place. But will this be enough to halt the massive flow of illegal immigration? We have analysis coming up. An iconic painting of American culture is up for auction. The expected selling price is around $20 million. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. We've heard a lot about Title 42 lately. That's the Trump-era border rule that allows border agents to remove illegal immigrants from the U.S. border due to the health crisis caused by the CCP virus. The White House planned to lift this in May, but now the fate of Title 42 remains uncertain. A Louisiana federal court temporarily blocked the administration from lifting this rule. Right as this ruling came out on Monday night, Biden had wrapped up a meeting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Here's how they responded to this.
That it was a lawsuit over asking a judge to stop the Department of Homeland Security from starting to remove and into the phase of removing Title 42, does not give authority to have the CDC reverse the decision that they made.
We talked about preparedness, we talked about border management, we talked about the importance of funding and resources that are needed.
The Hispanic Caucus told reporters that Title 42 should be lifted and that the government should focus on another border management policy. But some Democrats have split with the White House on this issue. Democrats at border states like Arizona and Texas in particular have said they're very concerned about what's around the corner if Title 42 is lifted. Even top Democrats and Biden allies like Senator Dick Durbin and Chris Coons have raised concerns at the plan to lift Title 42. Members of Congress will get a chance to question the administration's immigration policy this week. The Department of Homeland Security head, Alejandro Mayorkas, will testify to Congress and is expected to face pressing questions. Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is warning that impeachment may be in the works for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The signal to impeach Mayorkas came during McCarthy's trip to the southern border. He led 9 Republican lawmakers to Eagle Pass, Texas, where he held a press conference and criticized Mayorkas. The Biden administration plans to waive Title 42 on May 23rd, after which the number of illegal immigrant crossings is expected to double. McCarthy urged Mayorkas and the Biden administration to keep Title 42 in place.
And if Title 42 is lifted, it will be much worse. It's not just unsustainable now, it'll be uncontrollable then.
About 221,000 illegal immigrant encounters were recorded at the southern border in March. Projections by the Department of Homeland Security predict up to 18,000 attempted crossings per day if Title 42 is lifted. As we mentioned, a federal judge has put a temporary halt on the rollback of Title 42. And this comes shortly after a Texas National Guardsman drowned in the Rio Grande while trying to save an illegal border crosser. Congressman Randy Weber was just down on the border, and we're happy to have him on to discuss. Congressman Randy Weber, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you, Steve.
Congressman, you just returned from the border with a delegation led by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. What were some of your takeaways from this trip?
Oh, gosh, how much time do we have? Of course, first and foremost, as you know, we lost a soldier, a Texas National Guard soldier, Bishop Evans. They actually recovered his body while we were there, and they reported they found him in kind of an interview with the border or meeting with the border police. And so we were among the first to know, and it was so heartbreaking to find out later, not only his passing officer, Then we find out later that the guy he jumped in to say was actually a drug smuggler, as what their preliminary investigation is showing. So the border is so bad, as you and I were talking earlier. I was on the Borders Committee when I was in the Texas House of Representatives 2011 session. And it was bad back then, but it's so many more times worse. The people down there, we talked to business leaders, we talked to elected officials, mayors, county commissioners, chamber people, and I will tell you that they understand, that they're seeing it firsthand how bad things are, and they are decrying the fact that Biden and company wants to do away with Title 42 because they say, by all estimates, it will triple the amount of illegals coming across, maybe as much as 18,000 a day. And they can't take it now. It's not sustainable now. What will it be?
Congressman, you mentioned the Texas National Guardsman specialist Bishop Evans, who drowned. Right now, like you said, preliminary reports point to the fact that it may have been illegal. The illegal border crossers were drug smugglers. What has been the reaction from Texans?
Well, my Texans have, in my district, have, and really most of Texas for that matter, understand how you can't be a sovereign nation if you don't have a control of your border. They're angry that Biden and company have chosen the path that he's hung out. The come one, come all, we're open for business, basically. And I think, quite frankly, I think he bears part of the responsibility for the death of the specialist. I think he bears responsibility for a lot of deaths that have happened. People have died in the. This isn't the first time we've had a death, obviously, in the water there. Coming across, the women are raped. They found a 3-year-old boy there about 4 or 5 days ago, all by himself, that the whole group had just abandoned that child. Young girls are raped. I've been to the border, Steve, and seen what they call rape trees, where they will hang. I know this, sorry, ladies, but they hang their straws, this kind of trophy up in the trees. We hear the account story, and yet Biden says, keep on coming. If he lifts Section 40, if he's successful in lifting Title 42, it'll just be worse. My Texans hate that. They know what to say. I think most Americans do too, I would hope, and they rise up and throw the Democrats out in November.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy warned that if Republicans take the House, which is looking pretty good right now for that to happen, that impeachment could be on the table for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What are your thoughts on that prospect?
Well, any government employee at that level that doesn't do their job right, and as you know, we all raise our right hand, take an oath to uphold the Constitution, protect the people of the United States. And the fact that they won't go down there and they won't secure that border and do the things, as I said, how many more Americans have to be injured, robbed, raped, all those things, infected, before they will literally say, we're supposed to protect Americans first. Your heart goes out to those young people coming across, the families. You know how bad it is in the border, in the country south of us. But our job is to protect Americans first. Mayorkas or any of the others don't take that job seriously, and they invalidate in violation of their oath of office. Yeah, they need to be removed.
Congressman Randy Weber, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom released its 2022 annual report. It recommends to the State Department 15 countries of particular concern for the worst human rights violations, and 12 countries have been put on a special watch list. It was the first time in 20 years that Afghanistan made the list. After the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, religious minorities, including Christians, have become particularly vulnerable under Taliban rule. Christians are also vulnerable in Nigeria. Last year, the Biden administration removed Nigeria as a country of particular concern.
That's actually the first time that's ever happened, where you've had a country at that level of designation being removed completely, not downgraded.
Communist China has remained on the list for 2 decades.
So number one recommendation that we would make is to recognize that CCP is a threat to religious freedom in China.
Turkel said that Falun Gong practitioners were particularly vulnerable as the communist regime has been subjecting them to state-run live forced organ harvesting. The famous Washington Crossing the Delaware painting is coming up for auction next month. It's estimated to cost about $20 million. This painting is one of the most iconic works of American culture. It depicts Christmas night in 1776, when General George Washington led troops across the Delaware River to surprise the British hiding on the other side. The painting up for sale is a smaller version of the one in the Met in New York City. This one hung in the White House from the 1970s to 2014. And that's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Don't forget to check us out at ntd.com/Capitol Report and check out the Capitol Report podcast on Google or Apple platforms. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again tomorrow.